The ranch was falling apart. So why was the yard swept like someone expected company? The floorboard creaks under Thomas Whitaker's boot as he steps inside, dust hanging still in the air. A chair by the cold hearth. A woman asleep. Upright, boots on. A ledger open across her lap. Outside, the wind scrapes softly along the broken fence. Inside, nothing moves, until her eyes open, steady, already on him. She doesn't flinch, doesn't rise, just watches him like she's been waiting, and says something that makes him stop where he stands. Tell me, what would you do if you were him? The wind had a way of flattening everything out in the San Juan Basin. It carried dust low across the ground and left the sky wide and empty, like something had been taken out of it and never put back. Thomas Whitaker rode through it without hurry. His horse moved steady beneath him, hooves pressing soft into dry earth that hadn't seen a real rain in months. He kept his eyes on the land the way a man does when he knows what he's looking for. Not cattle, not men. Water. He followed a narrow trail that cut along a shallow ridge, one he'd ridden a dozen times before. There used to be a working spread down below. He remembered a fence line, straight and tight. A barn that leaned but didn't fall. Now, most of it was gone. The fence lay broken in long stretches, posts tipped over like teeth knocked loose. The barn had lost part of its wall, boards hanging open where the wind had taken its share. The house sat pale and still, the paint worn down to bare wood in places where the sun hit hardest. Thomas would have ridden past. He almost did. Then something caught his eye. The yard. He slowed his horse without thinking. The ground around the house had been swept clean. Not by the wind. Not by chance. The dust was brushed into faint lines, pushed away from the porch like someone had stood there that morning with a broom and taken the time to do it right. He sat there for a moment, looking down at it. Then he saw the garden. A strip of land along the side of the house turned over by hand. Rows set straight. Not wide, not deep, but careful. The kind of rows a person makes when they're counting on something to grow. Thomas let out a quiet breath through his nose. Didn't make sense. Everything else said this place was done. Left behind. Another name that would fade off a map no one bothered to redraw. But the yard was swept, the garden was planted, and the ash pile near the back door still held a faint gray warmth, like a fire hadn't been out long. He swung down from the saddle and looped the reins over a broken fence post. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud. The air felt still here, quieter than the ridge above, like the place held its breath. Thomas stepped onto the porch. One of the boards shifted under his weight, but didn't give way. The door stood open. He paused there, one hand resting lightly against the frame. Then he stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and dry paper. Light came through the window in a thin strip, cutting across the floor and up the side of a chair. That's where he saw her. A woman, seated upright, but leaning slightly to one side. Boots still on, sleeves rolled just past her elbows. A ledger lay open across her lap, one hand resting against the page like she had meant to turn it and never did. Her head tilted forward, chin near her chest. Sleeping, or something close to it. Thomas didn't move. He looked at the room. Not much to it. A table pushed to the side. A tin cup with a dark ring inside it. A coat hanging on a nail by the door. Everything worn, but nothing careless. His gaze dropped back to the ledger. Numbers filled the page. Tight handwriting. Columns drawn straight with a steady hand. He shifted his weight slightly. The floor gave a soft creak. Her eyes opened. No sudden breath. No sharp movement. Just a slow lift of her head, as if she'd only stepped away for a moment and had already decided to come back. Her gaze found him at the doorway, held there, steady, clear. Thomas didn't speak. Neither did she. For a second, the only sound was the wind brushing faint against the outside wall. Then she straightened in the chair, closed the ledger with one hand, and set it aside. When she spoke, her voice came low and even, like she was stating something already settled. "You don't belong past that door." Thomas stayed where he was, didn't step forward, didn't step back. His eyes moved once, briefly, across the room, then returned to hers. "No," he said. Outside, the wind shifted again, dragging a thin line of dust across the swept yard. Inside, nothing moved at all. The place should have felt empty. It didn't. It felt held together by something that hadn't broken yet. And Thomas Whitaker stood in the doorway of a dying ranch that wasn't ready to die. Not today. The woman didn't look away. She reached for the ledger, resting her palm flat against the cover, as if it belonged there more than anything else in the room. Then she rose from the chair, slow but steady, like someone measuring each movement before making it. Up close, Thomas could see the wear in her clothes. Not neglect, just use. The kind that comes from doing everything yourself. "You're a long way from the main trail," he said. She didn't answer right away. Walked past him instead, stopping at the door. She glanced out at the yard, at the clean lines drawn through the dust, then back at him. "People who need to find this place," she said, "usually already know where it is." Thomas stepped aside to give her room. She moved with a kind of quiet balance, like she knew exactly how much strength she had and didn't waste a bit of it. "Name's Thomas Whitaker." That got a flicker of something. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe. It passed quick. "Evelyn Brooks," she said. No handshake. Just the exchange. Thomas nodded once. "This land yours?" She walked to the far wall and reached up, lifting a small wooden frame off a nail. She handed it to him without a word. The paper inside had gone yellow at the edges. Official stamp still clear enough. A name written in ink that hadn't faded. Brooks. He looked at it a second longer than needed, then handed it back. "Been dry 2 seasons," he said. She set the frame back where it had been. "Closer to 3. Thomas let that sit. He stepped out onto the porch again and motioned toward the south end of the property. "Fence lines down." "I know. 3 sections, maybe more." "I know that too." She came out beside him, not looking at him, just following his gaze out toward the stretch of broken posts. Wind moved through the gaps, carrying a low whistle where wire used to hold. "If you bring cattle in come spring," Thomas said, "they won't stay yours." Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes tracked the line, followed it all the way to where it dipped behind a rise and disappeared. "How much?" she asked. Thomas glanced at her. "For what it takes," she added, still looking ahead. He rested his hands on the porch rail. The wood felt dry under his palms. 6 days' work, he said. 2 men, maybe 3, depending on the ground. Wire, posts, tools. He paused. $40, give or take. The number hung there. Evelyn's jaw set just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for him. She gave a small nod, like she'd already known the answer before asking. "I don't have it." Thomas expected that. Didn't say so. "I'm not offering to pay you," he said. That made her turn. Her eyes settled on him, sharper now. "I'm offering to send the crew," he went on. "You keep your land. I get something in return." She waited. Didn't rush him. Thomas pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, flipped it open with one hand. "Water runs through the east side of your property," he said. "Feeds into a lower basin I use for winter stock." Evelyn nodded once. "I take temporary rights to move cattle across that section. Limited time. Clear terms. No damage to your creek bank. Written out." She stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Not from age, from years of squinting into sun and wind. "And when your cattle are done?" she asked. "Land stays yours," he said. No hesitation. Evelyn held his gaze a moment longer. Then she moved past him, back into the house. He heard the ledger open again, pages turning, a pencil scratching lightly across paper. She came back out with the book in her hands and set it on the porch rail between them. "Write it," she said. Thomas didn't ask where. He bent slightly, bracing the notebook against the wood, and began to write. Slow, clear. Each line set down like it mattered. Evelyn watched. Not his face. The page. When he finished, he turned the notebook toward her. She read it once, then again. Her finger traced one line, stopped, and tapped it lightly. "If the bank washes," she said, "you restore it." Thomas nodded. "I'll add it." He did. She read the new line. Let the silence stretch just a bit longer than needed. Then she closed the ledger, set it aside, and gave a small nod. "All right," she said. No smile, no relief, just agreement. Out in the yard, the wind shifted again, brushing over the clean ground without disturbing it. Something had been decided, not out of need, out of terms both of them could stand on. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto that porch, Thomas Whitaker had the sense that this place might hold. Not because it was strong, because she was. The crew arrived 2 mornings later. You could hear them before you saw them. Wagon wheels grinding slow over dry ground, iron rims catching on stone, a team of mules pulling steady, heads low, breath visible in the early chill. Evelyn was already outside. She had been up since first light. The yard was swept again, same clean lines, same quiet order. She didn't wait for introductions. One of the men, gray beard, sunburned neck, eyes that had seen enough winters, jumped down from the wagon and nodded once. "Ben Harper," he said. She gave a small nod back. "Tools are there," she said, pointing toward the collapsed stretch of fence. "Ground's harder past the second post." Ben glanced once, then again, taking it in. "All right," he said. No questions after that. They set to work. Posts came off the wagon. Wire unrolled with a dry, metallic whisper. The rhythm of digging, lifting, hammering settled into the air like it belonged there. Evelyn didn't stand back. She took hold of a post-hole digger and worked alongside them. Slow at first, then steady. Thomas arrived near midday. He didn't call out, just rode up quiet, letting the horse stop on its own. He watched a moment. Evelyn had her boot braced against the edge of a hole, shoulders set, pulling the handles apart with a kind of controlled strength. Her hands were raw where the wood met skin. She didn't look up when the wagon creaked, or when one of the men laughed low at something said under breath. She worked like she had already decided how the day would end. Thomas slid down from the saddle and walked over. He didn't take the tool from her, didn't offer to. "You missed the line," he said instead, pointing with his chin. She paused, looked at the post, then at the ground. "You're right," she said. No defense, no excuse. She adjusted the position and drove it in again. Ben watched that, said nothing. By late afternoon, the first section stood straight again. Not perfect, but solid. The wind shifted just before sundown. It came in low, carrying the smell of something distant. Not rain, not yet, but something changing. Evelyn wiped her hands on her trousers and stepped back to look at the line they'd set. That's when she saw the rider, a single horse coming down the ridge. Not slow, not fast either, just steady, like the man on it had no reason to hurry. The tack caught the light first. Clean leather, silver fittings that didn't belong out here. The man swung down before reaching the yard. Didn't wait to be called. "Afternoon," he said, voice easy. Too easy. No one answered right away. He walked a few steps closer, eyes moving over the fence, the wagon, the men. Then they settled on Evelyn. "Name's Calvin Rourke," he said. She didn't offer hers. He didn't seem to mind. "Been looking over this stretch of land," he went on, brushing dust off his coat sleeve like it offended him. "Rail lines coming through in a year, maybe less. Changes things." Evelyn bent down and picked up her hat from the ground, set it back on her head, pulled the brim low. "Doesn't change this," she said. Calvin smiled. Not wide. Just enough. "Everything changes," he said. "Some folks just get paid for it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, held it between two fingers. $1,200, he said. "Cash, clean transfer, no trouble." The number sat there. Ben shifted his weight slightly behind Thomas. One of the other men spat into the dirt and looked away. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes stayed on Calvin's face, not the paper. "I'm not selling," she said. Calvin's smile didn't fade. It changed, just a little. "Winter's coming," he said. "Hard one, from what I hear. Land like this." He let his gaze drift over the broken barn, the thin garden rows. "Doesn't always make it through." Silence. The wind brushed across the yard again, softer this time. Evelyn stepped forward, just enough to close the space between them by a foot. "You made your offer," she said. Calvin tilted his head slightly. "I did. And I answered." He looked at her a long moment, then nodded once like something had been confirmed. "All right," he said. "I'll come back." He folded the paper again, slow, careful, and slipped it back into his coat. "Maybe you'll have a different answer then." He turned without waiting, mounted up, rode out the same way he came. No rush, no noise, just the steady sound of hooves fading back toward the ridge. No one spoke for a while after that. Evelyn walked to the edge of the yard, looked down at the dirt where his horse had stood. The ground was soft enough to hold the marks. She crouched slightly, studying them. Then she stood again, turned, and went back to the fence, picked up the hammer, and kept working. The sound carried farther than it should have. Each strike landed clean. Steel on iron, iron on wood, a steady rhythm that didn't rush and didn't slow. It went on until the light thinned out and the shadows stretched long across the yard. No one mentioned the man who had ridden off, but no one forgot him either. By nightfall, the first stretch of fence stood firm. Not new, not pretty, but set deep enough to hold. Thomas stayed longer than he planned. He helped where it mattered. Passed wire, set posts, checked the line twice when the others only checked once. When the last tool was set down, he didn't say much, just nodded to Ben. "We start early," Ben said. Thomas agreed, then turned his horse toward the ridge. He didn't look back. The next morning came colder. A thin frost clung to the ground where the shade held. The sky stayed pale, like it hadn't decided yet whether it meant to warm up or not. Evelyn was outside before the crew. She walked the fence line alone, boots pressing into the stiff ground, eyes moving over each post, each stretch of wire. She stopped once where the dirt had been disturbed. The marks were still there, fresh enough to read. More than one horse this time. She stood there a moment longer than needed, then turned back toward the house. By the time the wagon rolled in, she was already working. No one asked why. They all felt it. Something had shifted. It happened just past mid-morning. The sound came first, not one horse. 3. Evelyn didn't turn right away. She drove one more staple into the post, set the hammer down, then straightened. Thomas was already there. He had arrived earlier than the crew and hadn't said why. Now he stood near the south line, one hand resting lightly at his side, eyes fixed on the ridge. Calvin Rourke rode down slow, the same easy pace as before. Two men followed behind him. They didn't look around, didn't speak. They just watched. Calvin stopped a few yards short of the fence, let his gaze move over the posts, the wire, the men. Then he looked at Thomas. "Didn't expect to see you out here again," he said. Thomas didn't answer that. "This section," he said instead, nodding once toward the creek bed beyond the fence, "runs through land tied to my water rights." Calvin's smile came back, thin this time. "Paper can say a lot of things," he said. "It does," Thomas replied. Silence stretched. The wind moved through the posts, carrying a low hum along the wire. Evelyn stepped up beside Thomas, not close enough to lean, close enough to stand. Her hand rested near her hip, not on the revolver, just near it. She didn't look at Calvin. She looked straight ahead. "The answer hasn't changed," she said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. Calvin studied her for a second, then shifted his gaze back to Thomas. "And yours?" he asked. Thomas met his eyes. "Same as yesterday." Another pause. One of the riders behind Calvin shifted in the saddle. The leather creaked. A small sound, but it carried. No one moved. No one reached for anything. The fence line stood between them. Fresh posts set deep. Wire pulled tight. Calvin let out a slow breath. Then he gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else. "All right," he said. He turned his horse without hurry. Didn't say another word. The two men behind him followed. Hooves pressed into the dirt, then faded as they climbed back toward the ridge. The sound disappeared piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Just the wind, just the fence, just the quiet. Ben Hus was the first to move. He stepped forward, pressed a boot against one of the posts, tested it, gave it a short nod. "Line'll hold," he said. Evelyn didn't answer. She was still looking out toward where the riders had gone. Then she turned, picked up the hammer again, and set the next staple in place. The sound rang once, then settled into the quiet like it belonged there. No one hurried after that. The work moved steady through the rest of the day. Wire pulled tight. Posts set deep. A line that had once been broken now held its shape against the open land. By evening, the sky shifted. A thin band of orange stretched low across the horizon, fading slow into gray. Thomas checked the last section himself. He walked it end to end, boots pressing into the packed dirt, one hand brushing lightly against the wire as he went. Testing without making it obvious. It held. He stopped near the creek bed and looked back toward the house. Evelyn stood in the yard, near the edge where the swept ground met the rougher earth beyond. She had the ledger in her hands again. Not writing, just holding it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Thomas turned back, crossed the yard and stopped a few steps from her. "Fence will hold through winter," he said. She nodded once. "I'll keep watch on the creek," she said. "If the bank shifts, I'll mark it." Thomas gave a small nod. "Send word when you do." She looked down at the ledger, then back up. "I will." The light thinned further. The first cold of evening settled in, quiet and slow. Ben and the others finished loading the wagon. Tools stacked. Wire rolled tight. They didn't linger. When the wagon pulled away, it left tracks that cut across the yard, then faded as the ground turned harder. Soon it was just the two of them. Thomas shifted his weight slightly, like he meant to say something more, then didn't. Evelyn closed the ledger and set it against her hip. "You heading back tonight?" she asked. He glanced toward the ridge. The sky was already darkening there. "I am." She nodded. No offer to stay. No question about it. Just the understanding of how things worked. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He held it out. "The signed copy," he said. She took it. Didn't open it right away. Just felt the weight of it in her hand, like it mattered more than the ink on it. After a moment, she tucked it into the ledger. Safe. They stood there another second. Then Thomas turned, stepped off the porch, and walked toward his horse. He paused once at the fence line. Not to check it, just to look. The posts stood straight. The wire held tight. The line cut clean across the land, like it had always been there. When he looked back, Evelyn was still standing where he'd left her. The ledger held against her side, watching, not calling him back, just watching. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to her, and swung into the saddle. The horse moved out easy, up the ridge, past the broken stretch that was no longer broken, into the open where the wind picked up again. Evelyn stayed where she was until the sound of hooves faded. Then she turned, went inside. Set the ledger on the table and opened it. The pages were filled with numbers, notes, small marks that meant something only to her. She turned to a blank page, dipped the pencil, paused, then wrote a single line. Fence completed, holds. She sat there a moment longer, the pencil still in her hand. Outside, the wind moved through the posts, low and steady. The house didn't feel empty, not the way it had before. Evelyn closed the ledger and set it near the edge of the table within reach. Then she reached for the cup beside it. The coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't look at the door before the night settled in. Because something had been set in place that day. Not taken, not forced, built. And it was going to hold. If you had stood there that evening, with the wind brushing past the fence and the last light slipping off the hills, you might have felt it too. Not something loud, not something you could point to, just the quiet sense that two lives had crossed in a way that would not come undone easy. Maybe you've known a moment like that, a place where you had every reason to walk away, where the ground under you felt uncertain and no one would have blamed you for letting go. But something in you stayed, not out of pride, not out of fear, just a steady kind of knowing. Evelyn didn't ask to be saved. Thomas didn't try to take what wasn't his, and somewhere between those two choices, something rare took shape. Not a promise spoken out loud, not a hand reaching to pull the other along, just two people standing their ground and finding they weren't alone on it anymore. Maybe that's what love looks like, when it's real. Not a rescue, not a surrender, but a decision. Made quietly. Held steady. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear where you're watching from. There are more roads like this out there, more stories waiting in the dust and the silence. And if you feel like riding a little farther, you're always welcome to come along.